Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. An interesting title crossed my mind. At first, it was Void Victories of a Rock in Space. And then I kind of realized I'm saying actually Void Victories on a Rock in Space. So I thought about speaking about this idea and at the same time introducing this new concept I have of the universal creative value. Everything that has ever happened has occurred on this rock in the middle of nowhere. Our knowledge has began on this rock in the middle of nowhere. Our knowledge is the atmosphere, the kind of environment we navigate through. We are creatures that appear in a world where at first the first wave of communication of the world is that there are things known and things unknown. Aldous Huxley tells us there are things known and things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. That's very crucial because what that means is the governing intelligence of the human being has access to a range of data, but does not have access beyond that range of data. Because it doesn't have access beyond that range of data, it tends to conclude that there is more, there is more, there is more, because one cannot see it all. So we can say a lot of human behavior is a result of the response decided upon through one's sensory perception. As if imagine your senses are a sphere around you. From inside this sphere is arising the conclusion and the movement. It's like what's inspiring to move. The inspiration to move comes from the inspiration to acknowledge a space where one can move. Our sensory perception realigns, redefines itself as we move into different senses of space and different senses of time, different moments, in other words. Heraclitus has this interesting quote. He says, "No man can step in the same river twice, and it is not the same man, and it is not the same river." That means rather than one's life being a storyline, each moment on that line, each point on that line is their own respectable reality. You can say it's as if one, at most, it's like one moment of being present. But in this moment, when the person closes their eyes, they can fathom various other moments. What that means is behind your eyes, you have access to other parallel designs of various things you've seen. So what does that mean? That means when I wonder about myself, when my eyes are open, I'm more oriented to the objective reflection of my being. When my eyes are closed, who I am as a being has to do in some sense with the way the senses move beyond there. I believe that there are 8 billion, getting close to 8 billion people on this planet. Each person has an inspiration based on the world they see. That means right now, you listening to me, you are in starting it from your world. Imagine this whole world of ours is this, multiplayer online game, but it's like a virtual game. It's where the gamer is the character in the game. That's the difference between life and a video game. You know, it's as if it's how can I tell you? And the video game, the one controlling the video game is like your soul, and the video game developers are like God. What I mean by that is that in any sort of system of manifestation, in accordance to what the person can familiarize themselves, consciously see, then comes the response. For me, it's like on one view, sure, I could see how people feel the creativity is something that they have or they don't. But I could also see that it's not about something having or not. It's about a response. It's like creativity at its core is a response to a moment. It's like it's like a new chemical mixing with another chemical, totally transforming the nature of what that thing was. Or another way of saying is how Albert Einstein I believe he had this quote where he was saying, like, it's like when you intersect two worlds that never had anything to do with one another, that's a moment of genius. That means the bridging of dimensions tends to be a very high value thing, because in some sense it's creating a bridge. You see a lot of things. So where I'm going with this creativity thing is that in one view, sure, the person feels the creativity they have or not because they think it only comes from themselves, you know but another way of looking at creativity is that this world is filled with endless design, and your eyes and your sight and your mind and your consciousness is in some sense just a flashlight in the darkness. So based on how the flashlight is held, where it is directed, the world opens. The world is suddenly lit up into acknowledgement for a subjective sense. Right. So for me, it was this kind of cluster. At some point I got upset, but at another point I'm like, okay, this is how far the species has evolved. This is why you can't harbor hatred for your species, simply because you'll be like, it didn't know better. Like it couldn't do better. This world we see in front of ourselves is the effort of our ancestors. You see, I find the value of every individual mind is that it can provide a model towards an attempt at uncovering the unknown. What that means is we should treat our minds as empty canvases in which our living is painting certain patterns in certain movements of the biological program, the social cultural program on the individual being. The moment you're an individual, by the way, the moment you associate being like a single thing, that's when you also get an infinite imagination. Sometimes it's weird when the external reality gets limited, the internal reality gets a momentum to become limitless. But sometimes when the external reality is limitless, the attention doesn't need to go internal, so the internal reality becomes limited to how far the attention is external or internal. At some point in the mystical practice, this notion of an internal external fades, because then experience is really remembering its raw self. you know the hardest thing for human beings, I find, is to accept the moment. And it's so simple. That means the mind is kind of like the stomach is hungry, the mind is also hungry to know. Because the unknown is not enough. That's why we explore. It's not enough just not to know. We have to do something about that not knowing, right? All the great inventions were all attempts. Like, really what makes a great inventor is the endless endurance of hope they have. I feel all of education can be divided between immaterial and material studies. That means we're studying matter, and then we're studying the appearance of thought. And the ideas of previous people in history was simply how they functioned as a creature of thought. When we read Socrates, for example, we're just simply seeing how the mind of Socrates lived, the sequencing of imagery that his mind, in some sense, expressed. So every person has a hidden library behind their eyes. This hidden library is all the contents of imaginative expression. Or let me say it, it's abstraction. So your mind is like a receiver, think of it. And now in 2019, we're all like this kind of global digital tribe, you know? And this tribe is like back in the day, what would happen in a tribe, in a community? Members of the community would go explore and come back with their findings. So I find that we're 8 billion minds. None of us know what the mind is. In some sense it's unfathomable. In some sense it can be reduced to matter. So we don't know. That's the enlightening thing about life. When you realize the unknown is here, you know? So that means you got to have a much more sophisticated and playful view on your own ideology. So it's kind of like in this 8 billion mind tribe, we have to explore the unknown and come back with our findings, and we have to use our findings. It's like there's 8 billion minds. We can't have 8 billion minds just wandering in their own universes when there's a civilization to attend to. If civilization was updating without anybody being involved, that would be something. It's like the person didn't have to worry, kind of like universal income. It's like the civilization is like on its own. The civilization is moving you. It's like most people, I feel they feel at home based on the level of safety their mind considers. So if a person feels the whole civilization is on a giant turtle's back, so in some sense the people will stop caring about where civilization is going. They just trust the turtle knows where it's going, something like that. So that's an issue. I feel like the world is showing itself, especially nations and cultures, and various ways that people are communicating, when thought speeds up, it becomes communication, by the way. A creature of communication, now communicating the inner environment into the outer, but in accordance to their efficiency and style. Pretty much, guys, I'm saying that we need to, like that scene in Lord of the Rings 3 where Theoden, they just defeat the first kind of like, mushed up orc face army. Like when Theoden wins that first battle, they look back and they suddenly see these giant mammoths coming, and it's like Theoden is like, oh my god, like his face is like he doesn't believe it. But still, as a king in position, what does he do? He says charge. Like they hit their battle horns to awaken people's attentions, unify their attention, and they march. Right? So I find we in 2019 are discovering, I'm going to playfully say this, a new opponent to all of our minds. to all of our minds. There are no exceptions. If you're a conscious living being here, that your mind can articulate, move at faster speeds, you know, that means it doesn't matter if you're in a species and it takes you like, I don't know, long time to evolve and then you hear this talk. It doesn't it doesn't matter if you're an AI robot here. What I'm simply saying is that that marching into the unknown, it only happens when the cosmic solitude is acknowledged. There is a loneliness that is strangely enlightening. I don't know how to say it. It's a sort of divine loneliness. It's a loneliness where even the emotions have realized the void. You see, the void can be a source of suffering, or it could be a source of advancement. It's like when you realize something's temporary, it's like when you realize the candle is going to melt at some point, so you take that candle and you go explore, right? Rather than just leaving it there and saying, what's the point of exploration? It's like, you know, it's like all our victories suddenly become void to us. So what I'm trying to say with the title is that the more material we become, the more purposeless matter is, because matter is like paint. It's like it's like life is like let's say it's an art in an art gallery, and it's a portrait of someone or something, and right. And so we look at this portrait, but imagine instead of looking from a distance and seeing that portrait, we are zooming in our head so close, like a centimeter away from the artwork, and we only see the color dimension. We only feel it's just meaningless color, right? But when you zoom out, suddenly the design and more complexities come and refine the meaning. This idea of the universal creative value, you know, is this notion that I realize people have to reach a sort of their beliefs about themselves should be acknowledged as in one room, and they should realize all their beliefs are in a greater room. That greater room is a realization where you have to let your opinions reach like waters on a pond. They need to settle. So what does that mean? It's like a zero moment. Not zero in value, not any connotations of zero. I just mean it's literally man whose mind kind of stepped into a certain pattern of movement, stops in that pattern and just watches the moment, returns to a sort of kind of still point, and then reemerges. Right, so there's a sort of the inner revolution is a reemergence of the how archetypes previously were chaining the attention, were enslaving it. Anything that is not you that you have to keep considering is in occupying your attention. My situation is that I'm thinking, okay, 8 billion people here on this planet, they all have minds. The mind's potential is unknown. So what it really means is we're kind of like tourists in manifestation. Now, as tourists in manifestation, the purpose doesn't become only like too much seriousness. It's like what the purpose becomes quality of experience of life and access to experiences of life. That means we realize that imagine if we had world peace, it's not that life would be boring. The same intensity of the violence in the streets is now going towards a sort of subjective momentum. This is kind of like how civilization moves from one phase to another, right? Where the individuals begin questioning the collective story, the narrative, the ethos of civilization, and in doing so, reach that null point. You see, it's like, yes, in some sense, man may ask, okay, is it possible to see nothing as a creature that is something? And so there are philosophical debates. Philosophy is really a stretching of dimensions. It's more about the zooming in and zooming out. It doesn't really mind what's there, right? So what that means is that we are all playing around in a sort of energy that has no owner, and the subjective realm is not its owner. What that means is it begins bringing a much more level of sophistication in, right? That if we as a species don't have our attention on what is truly here on this planet, we're not even living on the planet. This is how important it is to be mindful of your conditioning, because you miss out on the present moment if you're still trying to live for the past. It's about quality of experience, and I've even reached a point where I thought it was about a strategy. I thought that civilization needs like a immediate kind of like Theoden, again Lord of the Rings 3 kind of strategy, right? But then I realized it's not about strategy, because human dimensions go beyond language, so that means pretty much intellect can never understand emotion. Intellect is about ascribing values and measurements and studying the repetition of patterns. You see, you got to realize it's so easy. Study your world, and then you'll get a sense of how your mind is. And when you go to study your mind, you're actually studying your subjective realm, because the mind is an idea. It's like Bodhidharma once, somebody told him, help me Bodhidharma, my mind's restless, please pacify my mind. And Bodhidharma shouted at the guy, bring your mind here in front of me. He's like, bring your mind in front of me and I'll pacify it. And the guy looked for his mind, never to find it. And then realizing, as Bodhidharma tells him, there, your mind is pacified, when the guy's like, I can't find it. And so the guy realizes that sometimes you have to accept the change in the design. It's not about an emotional victory, even a subjective plan. Eventually, it comes down to the realization that emotions are here first. This is why emotions are so important to be attentive to. And emotions are strangely, you can say, mystically kind of like they're divine. you know like a moment of anger is intense anger, even though it's like messed up, but because it's such a new intensity of an experience, the person will eventually ascribe some sort of unknown momentum to it. The thing is like, when you can't find the answer, at least look at the question again. So the question is, temporary creatures, certain range of ability, each freedom makes them not care about the collective vision, because freedom really means you can walk away anytime. That's what freedom means, right? And sometimes certain responsibilities in life, they burden one's attention. So it's like when you're stuck in a sort of external situation or a sort of pattern, it's as if your inner reality begins moving. So it's like anytime the body stops moving, the inner reality is simply the attention becomes more to the inner realm, to the how phenomenology is occurring in your inner environment, as I say, right? Because guys, I find this is one of those great contributions that are crucial for the realm of language. Man has to study now his relationship, not just with his family, not just with his lovers, not just with his future generations and children, but it's his relationship with the unknown. Because infinity is a promise that no experience can ever reach. That means it really, the concept of infinite experience is, it can't be ascribed to a personality. And I kind of noticed early on in especially traditional spirituality, when the idea of a soul was a sort of ego that was let into the club of truth. That means the soul was like a hidden ego, an ego that in some sense had the freedom of the infinite. You see, I'm saying that there was a point where man was looking at, saw stuff around him, objects, and was like, whoa, this is God. It was like, whoa, this is truth. This object is truth right now. And then some people came and like broke those objects. It's like, nah, man, this ain't truth. It just broke. And so what happened is, man, after worshiping an object, jumped to worshiping a subject. Language. We are language worshippers, if we think we are a thought. And that's my stance to the unknown, that I have realized language is never you. It moves in your observance though, and you can identify with it. It's a very strange kind of, I guess, philosophical perspective, because I can say, even though I've had different ideas throughout my life, and these in those moments where where those ideas were there, I've had different emotions and passions and inspirations and visions of everything. But from the beginning of my life, this kind of still observer has had the same relationship with any sort of movement. That's still, it's like, it's mind-blowing how much the human being, like, this is how cool the future generations are going to be. These kids are going to enter society, it's going to stress them out, and then they're just going to sit still and silent in nature for 10 to 20 minutes, just looking. Not no no It's like the meditation's called just watch your moment. That's it. It's like there's no outcome. The mind is a very strange territory where the creative independence moves it. So that means you have to be responsible for your inner realms. You can't just like, because if you want to journey consciously, there are ways, there are, and like I am also like, I'm also considering many human beings, they're not born alone. What that means is their mind remembers more than their body can identify with. And there's a flux of storytelling going on. So I can tell you something fascinating, that as human population increased, more people were inspired by more people's stories. And so there came a speed of storytelling. And this speed of storytelling, all the children that were born, or they in some sense began to realize, it's like, if the thought is important, it will be written down. If it is not important, it will be forgotten. Similar to a battle with the unknown, what that means is our species kind of realizes, like the movie Independence Day, where, you know, like the aliens attack and human beings are like, holy shit, let's stop fighting with each other and get this thing off our turf, you know? So I find the same enemy that united man is should be seen as the unknown, and the war with the unknown is not a physical fighting war. It's simply exhibitions of explorers. Pretty much it's like we have to rekindle a new wave of people, one asking some very simple questions from themselves. Because when you start from simplicity, then if you can handle the simple, you can handle the complex, and vice versa applies. That means if you've lived a complex life, you know, it's like the simple doesn't bother you. The universal creative value is this concept. Again, I'm constantly trying to paint it more clearly. I'm just saying, it's like human beings realize that this rock in the middle of nowhere gives them the freedom of conceptual imposition. What that means is you are actually, the mind is painting itself in accordance to the emotions response to the moment as well. So what does that mean? That means, like, if you suddenly get emotional, trust me, that's like a transformation of character. You know, it's like I thought it was hilarious. I'm like, how are we diagnosing mental health through language? And I realized, wow, it's as if rather than so many psychologists and therapists bringing people, like pretty much what it is the person's head is stuck in a box of language, and you have to be like, relax, look at it again, relax, look at it again, relax. And eventually after the person's like, okay, why should I look at this again? And eventually looks at it and sees it as the moment of its life where the great performance occurs. It's like, now this is it. This is the moment, guys. You know, this is where we are. This is our turn in history. The waking conscious state of humanity is simply like the stage where it's like, again, Like we're up next. Let's try to, for now, I thought this is a nice exercise. Let's kind of do this. Maybe there's a value to it. In this moment, ladies and gentlemen, simply wonder what the greatest member of the greatest civilization that your mind can fathom will look like. And give this question the freedom of also your subjective data, your cellular planes of abstraction. That means it's okay to see something more than it is. And it's also okay to see that thing as empty. And it's also okay to see whatever way you want to imbue the moment life. You know, I thought it was kind of silly. I'm like, oh, look at that young kid making the teddy bear into kind of like his best friend, you know, like young children, their toys are kind of like their best friends. They're imbued by their own personality, right? And so the person has made that. I'm like, oh, how silly. This kid doesn't know the teddy bear is not alive. How cute, you know? But then I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Just like how this kid is imbuing that teddy bear life, the mind is imbuing the body life. Do you see how fascinating it is? It's the relationship of a particle with a field where the particle has thought. The whole intelligence of the cosmos just comes from the particle, only for the particle to realize it's an expression of the whole field of intelligence. What that means is truly, truly, behind our eyes, beyond the deepest skies of the self, truth cannot exist in a world of illusion. And if we are a creature in the world of illusion, realizing that it's possible for there to be truth, then it means we are never creatures of illusion. It's fascinating. Thoughts are like masks upon the world. Upon the world. The whole philosophy, ideology of it can repaint it. At some point, I'm saying concepts are becoming so vast and many that eventually they're becoming meaningless. Because I'm telling you, that's the nature of things. When it becomes too big, right, it's as if like people care less about it. This is why the walk to power really leads to conquerors. Let me tell you why. Because in order for the person to rise from the system's like standard, the person has to behave in ways that are not standard. That means if you want to be better than something, you cannot behave the same way as that thing. Do you know what I mean? Searching for the vision of the moment. Oh, this is something I have to share. This is one of those great things that I was just intuitively, I just knew. I knew that every moment held a vision of genius. It's a matter of just time and patience to find it. You can sit down and be still in any moment of your life and just be silent and watch. As the minutes go by, what is happening in those minutes? The mind is looking around. Just like how a person's trying to find his keys in the morning. You know, similarly, the mind is scoping, wondering. And as the person's attention moves, you know, when you're in a block, you got your attention has to move. So what it is this kind of relationship, in order to be safe in a kind of changing world, the person has to be able to adjust. And so its adjustment can be instantaneous. Its adjustment can be it can occur with preparation, conscious preparation and strategy. Now, one strategy would be that if you're in a situation, it's like, think of it this way: people have various power levels. Just like how a person's voice can be very, very slow and, you know, inaudible. Similarly, the person's voice can be loud and intense and just louder, 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 you know? And so the person's intensity, there are levels. There are levels to your expression as a creature. You know, just like how you can move in various ways, your mind can animate itself as the moment in various ways. Now, a lot of its animation is given to nature. That means you're going to be shocked how much of your biology is in nature's hands, how much of it, and of course a certain majority. That's why we have hands, because we're also meant to be responsible in the game of survival. That means you can say it was survival of the fittest, but then it became survival of the most responsible, survival of the one whose response, whose ability and response in the moment, you know, is the guiding factor. So for me, it's kind of like, what's going to happen if society goes into a more duller, inefficient, let's say, civilization becomes a dull place. It becomes a place where people can't interact. You know, a sort of governments are very kind of divine metaphors, by the way. Let me tell you why. Because they are the individual creature's first relationship with a collective body. You see, just like how you have a relationship with your mind right now, which is being your moment, similarly, you can say it's the relationship of an ideological entity, you know, with a collective ideological entity. It's always easier to let go of something than picking it up, because to hold something in your hand takes more energy. You have to keep holding it. The sort of like, as if you, if imagine like a person's ideology upon the moment. Let's say the person wakes up and gets an impression of how the day is. That impression is simply like, imagine your hand holding something with a certain intensity. It takes there, believe it or not, there's a sort of energetic exchange with every thought. That means it's like you can a creature cannot move without particles leaving and particles being added. It's a sort of change. You cannot do anything about change. Life changes you whether you like it or not. So at least stick for the ride. You know, stick around for the ride. Stick around to see how far your civilization's eyes will open. Because it's one lifetime. Every day happens once. And what should we do? Just bask in dreams like they're saunas, you know? Think of it this way: the moment man accepts himself as temporary, everything he looks at he will feel is temporary. The moment man thinks he's eternal, everything he looks at suddenly feels eternal. And simply because there are various options, simply when anything that has two options in it means the realm has multidimensional freedom. That means it's like, as if yes, you are wrong in one dimension, but in another dimension your viewpoint is correct. It's like an action, a sort of effort and contribution in one moment of history could be right, but in another moment of history it could be wrong. This is why I say that the whole spiritual game is like, the people are realizing this avalanche, a sort of apocalyptic end result, that it doesn't matter where you are, who you are, and what you are doing. The moment is alive, and be alive. And I think eventually it's like, because a lot of it is in nature's hands, man only has two hands, but nature's hands is the whole universal sector, you know? It's as if kind of like asking realizing evil becomes nullified if it's immortal. It's like, how long can a pattern repeat? Any pattern that repeats and the person can't change from, it's like hell. So it's kind of like, you got to realize this archetype of the person in heaven and the person in hell, right? Let's say we entertain the Italian poets Dante's Inferno, okay, which I feel somebody was telling me yeah, I feel I was having a discussion with someone about it, where it was like, they said Dante's Inferno gave the picture to hell. Okay, that means there could have been an idea of a lesser world, but just the picture was drawn by. It's like, you don't understand how much of mythology is comes from poets. Poetry is not like, the guy's a poet, what a sensitive human being. No, poetry is like the mythology. It's like creating a city of design. You know, poets birth many mythologies. You know, if their eyes are open and their heart can see too. You know. Elon Musk spoke about something very important. He said it's important to create a feedback loop. What does that mean? That means reacquainting with the content of your mind. It's like certain ideas, the person will know that it's not, like, let me tell you, knowing is also a discovery. That means it's like, there was a sort of state the mind was, and suddenly when it knows, that state changes. Even you can chemically see. The world is cruel because unless you realize your mind is the only thing that can save you in this life, your mind is the only vehicle you are truly in. Your free will is about conscious claim of attention. So your attention is existing as an intelligent space. So this intelligent space, this is you. What that means is your mind's territory is really based on how the self is shaped in accordance to what it is aware of. It's kind of like, you cannot respect the presence of others if you cannot respect the presence of yourself. It's as if you cannot expect others to forgive you if you cannot forgive yourself. You cannot expect anything from others if you cannot attempt it yourself. So what I mean by that is that we are honestly trying to find a solution. only to discover the problems changing, and it has ancient issues, and it's like, oh my god, it has extreme future expectations, and there's, it's like currency has made us again into wild beasts, you know, in regards to the morality of our inner care for the living. You know, it's like you either care for life, you don't. Something that broke my heart, it's like, I remember I saw this video, somebody showed me this video on YouTube where it was like, I don't, sorry, it wasn't on YouTube, it was like on somebody's phone. Somebody showed me this video where there were these animals that were, instead of the guy, the people who had captured these animals, I'm sorry, this part's a bit extreme, but I'm going to tell you the truth of the world we live in. It's like these people were, instead of killing the animal and then cutting its skin, while it was alive, they were cutting its skin, and it was so tragic. It was like, it was a moment where it's like an avalanche of tears, you know. And so in that moment, I don't know what to tell you, but it was, I got shattered, because I realized the more unconscious the person is, the more they are lost to the animalistic violence of nature. You see, man is the civilized one. We humans are the better knowers, you know. And it's as if it's the kind of like the person being like, oh my god, like the Buddha, like it's as if like there's karma, and it's like what I do to something else is what I'm actually doing to my mind, which will echo in my mental field. So the value of our victory is really not in us having, I guess, to, in a way of looking at it, to having a solution. It's just that we can manage the problem. We can, at least as a species, tell a new story to ourselves about what we are. Right now, people have to first find a liberation from the language that is capturing them in their mind. Right? Everybody is, it's like there is nobody perfect. Everybody has moments of weakness. And there are, of course, moments of strength. Many people don't claim moments of strength because society is telling them, be normal, be weak. Do not question your environment. Just go, you know, continue in the hamster wheel. This hamster wheel where this rat is racing in this rat race, let me tell you, it's a flaw. It's void. It's empty. It's all about just the person when they're in their waking conscious, in their conscious waking state. How is the experience occurring? And if civilization can be resourceful, it has done the greatest it can. So I'm saying that it's like the world is kind of weird. The person goes to nature, nature is silent. I mean, the more silent you're peaceful. But if you're a high energetic person, you're like, okay, you can't just be sitting in nature. So you run out. And you run into the city, and you go to the city, and you suddenly see it is too loud, too chaotic, too out of control, too warlike, too battlefield like, right? And so it's like you go there and you're like, okay, in this chaos, how can I see the order? So the person constantly travels between different domains of constantly reshaping, redesigning the structure, the blueprint of what life means, how it is being, in some sense, cut up and categorized in every moment. The mind can be very calm. Sometimes when you respect your mind, this is a strange concept, but it's another way of saying respecting all phenomenology in your moment, you know? That doesn't just include you. That doesn't just include even if you entertain a concept of creator or not. It just means watch intelligence happening, and that's it. From the clarity of just how your experience, if you do nothing, you just want to see what it's like, and you suddenly notice, whoa, it's like sometimes the environment obligates us and makes us a voice. Every environment also has a voice. It's not just people who speak, it's also environments and atmospheres that in some sense create meaning. Because we're an emotional creature, you can say in every environment you go to, in every room you walk in, there's a new emotion, there's a different emotion. If you're a person whose thoughts are moving too fast, that means you would try to assume how you would feel in the future. And that becomes inefficient, because then you are going to outsmart your own ego in not confronting the direct experience. This happens for people who thought moves fast for them. Pretty much for me, it's not about people. There's no such thing, to be honest, as smart and stupid people. It doesn't make sense, the concept. It's just about people who, if we saw every person as an antenna, kind of what speed is their reception, right? And usually a person's expression kind of represents and reflects their kind of inner speed, right? An incredible wave of pure knowledge, which is another way of saying clarity, hits the person when they acknowledge the endless and they acknowledge the void. And you realize you are standing in between. Your mind, infinity is a toy for your mind. Infinity is a toy for your body. Immortality, it's a toy for your body. And then you're going to eventually see, okay, so either my inner ideology has to adjust to the external, or the external has to adjust to my inner ideology. But here's the thing, this is just the most primitive way of looking at it. This is the fight or flight kind of notion, right? In a more, in this kind of subjective context on painting. But what I'm saying is, like, I find it's like a healing moment when the person realizes it's okay for the unknown to be unknown. It's okay for the known to be known. It's okay for the known not to have access to the unknown. Now check out this part. It's okay for the known to have access to the unknown. It's kind of like going through this grid of morality and eventually coming to a parallel version of yourself where you see it's okay to go through with the idea. You know, the mind is fascinating. It's not just the storyteller; it is living in the story as an objective being. We are in the simulation of our. It's like the neurons are painting interesting pictures of the world. And man has to maintain, I call this an important pillar of civilization, the pillar of civilization of free will. This is so important. Free will means you are allowed to exist. You're allowed to move in any way that is natural to you. You see, it's ethics is another discussion. The maturity of the civilization is another discussion. The depth of our search when we acknowledge the void is another discussion. And it's like, this is kind of like, that's why I'm saying it's like there's 8 billion minds that are just dwelling in their own worlds, and eventually they have to find a sort of collective vision. This collective vision has to do with, I think, a sort of commonality. It's like the Tower of Babylon kind of metaphor, where man used to speak one common language, and in that common language, like in that one language, in that one language, man built a tower that reached the heavens, and man was getting close to the gods, and the gods were like, whoa, man's climbing too far. And then the gods throw lightning or whatever. Sorry, they don't throw lightning. They make human beings speak different languages, and the moment they can't speak different languages, they have been divided and they have been conquered. So now we're starting in just like the aftermath of the Tower of Babylon story. Similarly, we are in the aftermath. In that aftermath, what we've come it from a different way. Rather than being great and then collapsing, we are like, okay, we were living in the woods. Now we're living in cities. And so, what is the greater aim? So this notion of the Tower of Babylon, this one common language, I've thought about it, and my own intuition is that, like, there's this kind of sentence I remember writing. It was like, geometry is the next great language of all languages. Some unknown reverence and divinity to geometry. Geometry it's like a chess piece in our history, and it's going to become a very important kind of point of attention. So this I always thought about. All right, so that what that means is just like how I open the dictionary and I see a sort of definition of it and a translation of a certain word. Similarly, it's as if my mind can see sensory phenomena and translate it into geometry in the same way that my mind is like projecting the personality. That common language takes us to a very unique kind of philosophical observation that if there could potentially be a common language of experience, what does that mean? That means we're minds pretty much lost to our own worlds. Could there be a moment in our own worlds that we see the one world we're all in? That one world is an experiential language, and I was thinking, wait a minute, if we even consider fathom this notion of one common language, and the language is an experiential language, it has nothing to do with duality, it has nothing to do with words and symbols, it's just every person has access to every person's experience. And then I'm like, whoa, this is another way of saying it's as if we have to become a collective being. So that one great language was how humanity, just like how all those birds fly together in the sky, was one collective being. It was as if a sort of strange freedom where the freedom of one person became the freedom of others, you know? And so it became a strange situation where all these candles lit each other and became one great kind of beacon. So what I'm saying is that I feel that great language is that great language of experience, which has a sort of, you can say, geometrical value. It is when we have realized by nature we are one movement. It's like every person returns to not returns, but remembers a sort of, rather than being a particle in a field, being a field in a particle, being the field moving the particle, and an intelligent, observant field. So that's the thing, that we must at least try to evolve language. Terence McKenna, the scholar, he says, a culture evolves as fast as its language does. So the evolution of language through a sort of new freedom for the direct experience to wonder about the moment. In Tibetan Buddhism, there was this concept of a sort of inner treasure revealing. And that fascinated me. It was because, on some level, sometimes people are hopeless of finding the outer treasure, you know. But at least there was an inner treasure, So in that moment, I wondered about the inner treasure, and I realized the only thing that the inner treasure can be is the introduction to a state of mind where the free will and the divine will are kind of inseparable and transparent, transparently being both, right? That means it's like suddenly I realize, whoa, it's a pattern, it's a movement of nature. My thoughts are embodied to a sort of natural rhythm, And you, if you really pay attention to it, it's like it's not just the movement of your voice box, like your biological voice box, but it is also kind of like your breathing. The rhythms of your breath or dictate the weather of your speech, you know, the weather of the words that you speak, you know. So man can't really tell the unknown what to do. He can only see how far his knowledge has come, and as he wanders, then various perceptions through the gaze of the explorer, you can say, open up. The unknown becomes not meaningless, it becomes where all meaning is hovering. So anyways, guys, it doesn't mean also like victories are void because the rock is in the middle of nowhere. It just means man's, when he finds a way where his experience advances and becomes efficient, then his problems of the past we don't care about. So what that means is if there can be a sort of advancement and care for one's inner environment, you know, and just the person will eventually find their pace. Every person's mind, I find, moves at a certain speed. Like I remember when I was younger, I didn't like reading, but then I realized, oh my god, my whole life I was reading too slow. When I began reading really quickly, suddenly it was as if like a movie began animating in my mind, right? And so it was a very every person's mind, it's kind of like as you study the self, study the moment, you'll find your mind's pace. Upon trusting how the mind is naturally being, eventually the person will begin to notice, how can I tell you, it's like a new state of mind is a new way of having attention to the moment. So in that new way of having attention to the moment, there's more you see. So you can say the deeper the eyes become, the more abstract the imagination is, or the geometry becomes more complex and expressive. So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. And beyond language and the language threshold, greater explorations remain. So it's we can't avoid the mind, we have to explore it. That's another way of saying it. So much blessings and namaste.